Welcome to Talking Money. It's episode 18. I'm delighted to welcome back Hannah Godfrey, and we've got three topical personal finance stories to go through with you this week, starting with a bit of a decline for the private rented market. So, Hannah, this was some research carried out by the Mortgage Works, which are an arm of a building society, arm of Nationwide Building Society, and it's quite interesting. After quite a long period, about 20 years of growth in this market, in this private rented sector, it now appears to be going into decline. So, what did you make of that?
Well, I just have to throw it out there as well for Nationwide. They've essentially put this research together and gone, we don't really know why this is happening. And they've sort of given their outlook on what's happening. They've said it's a cloudy forecast going on, which I love, because it's kind of admitting we're not sure what's going on, because of course none of us know what's going on at this particular point. But yeah, so like you say, we essentially had 2 decades of rapid expansion when it came to the private rental market. And then in the last 3 years, there's been this moderate retreat. I mean, it is fairly moderate still. I think it's dropped by 1.5% over 3 years. So
Yeah.
it's not like you're even looking at 1.5% in a year, but that's kind of what's going on. And Nationwide have given a few kind of rough ideas of why this might be. So, for instance, there's increased regulation in the rental market. There's political uncertainty, which they didn't give further explanation. I'm not sure what they mean by that. And there's tax changes, which actually does make a lot of sense, because this is to do with the introduction of a higher stamp duty rate on the purchase of additional properties from 2016, which of course kind of dampened investor desire,
Mm.
which entirely makes sense in terms of rental property. Um, so that's kind of where we're up to. I mean, if you just look at the last year of the pandemic, my personal theory on why you might have seen another year of decline is that, and obviously we know that I live in London, and I know certain people kind of went, well, why on earth am I going to be renting if I don't have to be within easy proximity to
Yeah.
my office? And so a few people I know moved back in with their parents, because it just made no sense paying £800 a month if you're actually not really going anywhere, you don't have any space. So that's kind of my take on it, but there's still no firm idea of what's going on.
No, and I think something they hinted at in the research was whether there's a movement like first time buyers are now, renters are becoming first time buyers, because you've had these government incentives like help to buy, like the stamp duty holiday, and now more recently, which I'm sure doesn't feed through into these figures, but more recently the low deposit mortgage scheme, which we've talked about. So whether some private renters are thinking, okay, rent, it's almost like wasted money, I should try and turn that into a mortgage payment instead. And actually, those government incentives, those schemes are getting them onto the property ladder. So that could be responsible for some of the decline. I think certainly during the pandemic, during the past 12 months, we've seen this shift in property preferences. So people wanting to move out of city and town centres, wanting a bit more indoor and outdoor space. So moving further afield into the suburbs, into more rural locations and countryside locations. And that could be driving it too, because there's lots of rental property around where you are, I'm sure, in London. There's very little in villages and smaller places. Here in Cranley, there is no rental market effectively. There's 3 lettings agents I know in the village, and all 3 of them have moaned to me in the last fortnight or so that there is nothing available for them to let at the moment. So I think that's part of the issue here. And as you say, changing scenarios for investors, for landlords as well, and that stamp duty surcharge they had to pay was one element, but also tax relief on mortgage interest is now being limited, on rental income is now being limited, and that's been the case for a few years. So the current government, whilst it is a Tory government, wasn't particularly friendly for buy-to-let landlords, which is a bit of an
No.
odd one, and that could be starting to damage the private rented market too.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense, and I'm actually okay with that. And if what you say, actually, the point you made as well about people moving further out, perhaps we're in a situation where, for instance, you had a lot of people in London that wanted to be close to work, but no one can afford to buy in London, or very few people can. And this kind of gave them license to go and become first-time buyers elsewhere, which is perhaps why the rates have dropped, which is, something else to consider. The other thing that's been pointed out here is that rental growth in the private sector in most parts of England has kind of stayed steady. So actually all these kind of movement around, I'm surprised to learn they didn't kind of immediately up rents on, places like you live, basically, nice villages that are within easily commutable distances to big cities. Aside from in London, where the prices have dropped, as I think I've already said on this podcast before, and it's about, wanting to move out and not having a particular desire anymore to be renting in a very small place with no outdoor space.
Yeah, and I should have pointed out actually that the rents have massively increased for stuff that is available here in the suburbs, in the sort of rural areas. So some agents are telling me it's up about 30% in the last year in terms of
That's a
typical rent. So
lot.
yeah, if you want to live somewhere pretty, you have to pay a lot more for it if you're renting, and actually property prices have been going up around here too. There was a figure, and I'm desperately sort of scrolling to try and find it, which was the proportion of people in England who are now private renters. And here we go. It fell from 19.3% in 2019 to 18.7% in 2020. And I find that one quite interesting. It's down from 20.3% back in 2017. But I find that quite interesting in that England is, and the United Kingdom is a bit unusual when it comes to property ownership versus renting. And certainly on the continent, renting is more of a norm than it is here in the UK. Here it is all, an Englishman's home is his castle sort of mentality, and that home buyer drive we have. But it does seem to be going even more in that direction, away from renting towards home buying. Certainly if that's happened over the last 3 years or so. I think what will be very interesting is whether this is the start of a trend, or if this is just a blip in the data because of this incredible set of circumstances we've had in the past 12 months.
I don't think it's necessarily a blip in the data. I think you're right. I personally, this is just a personal opinion, I'm happy to be wrong, but I think at some point this will level out, and maybe it'll be next year or the year after. But I think there will always be rental demands, because as we move to something that looks more like normality, and now, writing about business every day, I'm seeing that businesses are sort of saying to staff, we want you in from June 1st, sorry, not 1st, June 21st, at least for a few days a week. And so I think the more steps we take towards normality, the more actually we'll find that trends like this level out, because suddenly people will want to be renting in places like the capital again, or wherever you are in the country. People rent all over the place, it's not just London. So I imagine there will be a leveling out, but I don't think, as you said, I don't think it's as attractive anymore to rent as an investment. I mean, by all means, flip houses, that still seems to be a very good way to make money, but renting just isn't as good a way to make money as it used to be. So I can't see tons of people buying into a rental market.
No, I mean, certainly from the experience that we speak to our clients, it's all been going the other direction. They've been selling buy-to-let investment properties in the last 3 or 4 years. Becky and I sold one that we had 2 years ago now, just because it wasn't as attractive to do anymore. The taxation, the regulations, everything else, it wasn't as an attractive investment proposition, and that's the direction we've certainly seen from our clients in recent years. And I suspect that's the bigger picture, the wider picture too. But it's fascinating stuff. And as you say, as people are being encouraged to go back to the office, even if that's on a hybrid approach, there was a lovely quote today. I think it's Goldman Sachs, isn't it, who are telling their staff, and it finished with, I'll completely butcher the quote, but we know our staff hate to commute, but they just have to get on with it or something. It's like,
oh God, wasn't
particularly compassionate.
Terrible.
As people go back to the office, they're gonna have to then reassess. Maybe this last 12 months was just a lovely dream that we're all waking up from now, and we're not able to have that flexibility in where we live and where we work, and we do have to go back to sort of living near our offices. Who knows?
Who knows? I mean, to be fair, I think Goldman are being a little bit extreme in this, I have to say, because it's the classic kind of investment bank, isn't it? Of all the industries that you would look at and go, who is going to absolutely refuse to change and is going to keep things where they are because they're making loads of money, they're paying their people a fortune, so they expect them to do exactly what they want and fall into line. And so, of course, it's the investment banks. But even Goldman now are out of step with JP Morgan, who have kind of, don't get me wrong, they're not saying, work from home, do what you like, but they've said, we'll probably reduce office space. So it sounds like there's that move towards, we're not going to drag you in 5 days a week. But even big companies, like I wrote today that KPMG have sort of are going for a hybrid approach now. All these major consultancy firms are doing it. So I think we will still be in a hybrid approach, but I don't believe that we're all going to be working from home 5 days a week.
No, there you go. There's Hannah's prediction.